What is up, League? Today is rankings day, and Justin is not here, so I'll be stepping in to give my approach to rankings. It's been a while since I've done it. Hopefully, I do a good job and don't get clowned on by everybody for having a terrible list. But we'll just have to see how this goes. Pretty much what I've got going here is something I added to a little side project I've been working on for League history. Um, I have, I pretty much input all the players' points that they had for whatever season. For the 2025 season, I'm just using their 2024 points for now. And then for rookies, I'm doing their projected points. Um, ideally I would have points for rookies, but obviously that's not possible. Um, but that's just is what it is. Um, these down here are my actual rankings for you. So I looked at everybody's RB room, everybody's wide receiver room, everybody's quarterback, tight end, and bench. The RB rooms and wide receiver room kind of play in a little bit to the bench depending on just the layout of your team. I generally try to keep it as if I consider them a bench player. They weren't really contributing to the wide receiver room in that type of way because typically I think most people play the players they play. And having a strong bench is part of that, so I put it on there separate. Um, and it just means your floor is probably higher if you have a better bench, and so I think overall your team is better. Um, but I gave everyone a ranking on every single thing, and then for running backs, receivers, and tight ends, I did a 1.5x multiplier, and then we'll add up whatever you got ranked on all of these and divide by 5. Also, the reason for the 1.5x multiplier is due to the variance of the positions. I believe having a strong RB room is more difficult than having a strong QB room. And so, yeah, that's why. Um, so without further ado, we're going to go right into Ryan's team. He has Jahmyr Gibbs and Kyron Williams, which I believe makes a very strong RB room. I think Jahmyr Gibbs speaks for himself. And, honestly, Kyron does as well. I think Jameer's in a very strong offense. They lost Ben Johnson, but I think there's that offense is so strong that they'll probably still be fine without him. Kyron, I know the Rams were a little weaker last year and on a weaker season. From the offense as a unit, he still put up 255 points, which is pretty incredibly high for most players. I mean, Amon Ra was right over here was a wide receiver, I think 3 last year and had 258. So 255 is definitely a good amount to be putting up. Trey McBride, you know, I believe that he, in my personal opinion, is actually a better pick than Brock Bowers. I'm sorry, Colin, but he gets that lion's share of the targets. Being a tight end on the Cardinals. I don't have the most respect for Kyler Murray. I'm not a big fan of him. As I was a Marvin Jones owner last year. And Trey McBride, put up all these points with only scoring 3 touchdowns, which is incredibly impressive, and I believe he should get more touchdowns. Um, and I imagine the volume will stay. Obviously, Jalen Hurts is, one of the top 4 QBs to have in the draft. I would say, they all had 4 lined up in ADPs just going right beside each other, so that was a good pick by Ryan to get in the 4th round. I think there was a few QBs that went in the 3rd, one of them drafted by myself. But then we get into like the weaker part of Ryan's team, which I believe is his receiver room. Between Tet, Devontae, and Travis Hunter. I think, Devontae Smith could be very good. I think he was like a 2-3 turn player last year, but he ended up having a disappointing season. That could have also been 2 years ago, but he had a pretty disappointing season. Tet is a rookie, but he's not in the best offense, and so it remains to be seen. So I don't really think Ryan's receiver room's that good. And then Travis Hunter as well, obviously a top talent coming in from the draft. Um, I think I mean, I honestly don't really know because he plays cornerback, plays receiver. I believe it makes more sense for him just to play more receiver, but we'll have to see. Um, and although Ryan's receiving core is a little weak, his bench kind of helps to mitigate some of that. He takes Rasheed Rice in the eighth round, and after week six, Rasheed Rice will be back, and I think Rasheed Rice is a very good player. He was very good before he got hurt last year. And so it could be looking good for him. Debo Samuel, I know is people are saying is a little washed, but he will also be on a very good offense. And Darnell Mooney, was kind of sucked on the Bears, but he had a pretty good season at 161 last year. Um, and so I think that adds like a good amount of depth at a position that Ryan is a little weaker at. I like the handcuff in Quinton Judkins. If he gets to start, could be good. Tyler Algier is a great handcuff. Marvin Mims, I mean, it's the 13th round. Doesn't really matter. Dylan Sampson to go right with Quinton Judkins. So Ryan's really locking up that Browns RB room. I don't know if it's the best RB room to lock up, but it's 14th round. It's hard to come by anybody. You look at everybody else's 14th round picks. There's not really much there. Um, this down here is just like uh, his regular starting lineup and me doing like the points he would get if he just played all of them every week based on the points he scored last year and projected points from it. But this doesn't really mean anything. This is just when I was looking at it to get me in the mindset of seeing how players performed last year. And yeah, this was not really taken into account at all for these rankings down here. I think you'll see that you know people that are projected high on these points aren't necessarily projected high in here, from my opinion. But yeah. Um, so let's move on to Collins' team. Collins got a strong core running backs as well between Saquon and James Cook. They both play on high-powered offenses. I know people think Saquon's going to regress, and he very well might. It's hard to keep up that level that he produced at, but even if Saquon regresses a little bit, he'll still be very good. Uh, Colin took the second best tight end in the draft, in my opinion, Brock Bowers. And, if he ends up being tight end one this year, I wouldn't be surprised. I think he got a little bit better QB play with Geno Smith. And, yeah, it should be looking good there. I think Collins' wide receiver room, I actually prefer a little bit to Ryan's. Uh, but it is like very upside heavy. Like the floor of Tyreek Hill could be very bad, especially if Tua gets hurt again this year. But Tyreek Hill, like probably 2 years ago, was a first round pick in fantasy, and getting him in the fourth round could be potentially good value. I think Aaron Jones was a great pick. Um, you know, he has always been like a pretty good running back. Um, but the addition of Jordan Mason may actually cause some issues for him. So we'll have to see how that plays out this year. But I think Aaron Jones has always been pretty good as long as he can stay healthy. Bo Nix, I think the Broncos were a middle of the pack offense last year, led by him, and ideally he goes better into year two. Um, Unlike C.J. Stroud, who regressed in year two, although he had a weak offensive line. We'll have to see how Bo Nix does, but I think the pick could be pretty solid. Ramondre Stevenson. I'm curious how the Patriots running back room is going to play out because I don't really know much about Trevion Henderson. I'm not a college football watcher. I do not know ball. If I try to talk college football, then I'm just speaking loads of crap. Um, but the addition of Mike Vrabel there, potentially could result in them having a strong run game. But maybe Vrabel's strong run game was just from having debatably the best running back over like the last like 6 years as a whole. Um, but we start getting into Collins. I guess he's technically part of Collins bench, so that's actually a pretty good player to play in. I also think Jawan Jennings is a pretty strong receiver to have on your bench as well. Kind of helping. you know, how worried you might be about Tyreek Hill or DJ Moore. Um, Chris Godwin as well, you know, another strong offense. You know, Chris Godwin's been good over the years. He's always just a little bit injury prone. Trey Benson, I was really excited for him last year, and I was a little bit early. Maybe he'll pop off this year, but I'm gonna need to see more from him, or more, at least more opportunities for him before I can be getting hyped about that pick. But I think it's a good handcuff, and definitely gives Colin a little bit of potential on his bench. Xavier Legette, uh, obviously they added Tet this year, so I don't really know how their receiver room's gonna play out. Not the best pick, but like I mean, round 12 it starts getting a little tough to get anyone good. I think C.J. Stroud is a good pick for a potential bounce back season. You know, Bo Nix could regress and C.J. Stroud takes a step forward, and Colin might end up playing C.J. more than he plays Bo. We'll just have to see. Romeo Dobbs, I don't think he's the best pick, but it's 15th round. I think most of the guys that Packers room is so crowded that it's gonna be hard to see. Uh, who's gonna actually be good. Let's move into Braxton's team. He went a little different than Ryan and Colin. You know, where they well, actually not really. They just took tight end early, but uh, he started with Amon Ra and he got Terry in the third, so I feel like that's a pretty strong receiving core. I really like Terry this year. I think he was a good value pick for because of all the contract issues. I think his ADP slipped more than it likely should have, and on a strong Commanders offense, I think he'll be really good. And Amon Ra is like a no-brainer. I don't really need to talk about him. They did lose Ben Johnson, I guess, so maybe he takes a step back. But I imagine he gets a lot of targets, and he's probably gonna catch the ball a lot. Uh, Braxton's running back core, Derrick Henry, and James Conner. I think Braxton's kind of in the realm of these guys who have been uh, just living, just keep living, more so than people realize. People have been sleeping on James Conner and Derrick Henry most years, I think, and saying this is the year that they fall off. Hopefully for Braxton, that is not the case. And if it is not the case, I think he has a very strong RB room. Calvin Ridley goes well with the wide receiver room. I believe that Cam Ward should be a better quarterback than Will Levis, but it's still hard uh, when you don't have a veteran quarterback as a receiver. So it makes sense for him to be a fifth round pick. I think Patrick Mahomes is potentially a good value in the sixth round. Last 2 years he hasn't been what people wanted, but for the previous like 3 or 4 years, he was like a QB 1 to 5 range, and so he definitely could end up playing much better. Um, Jacoby Myers, I think, will be very good with Geno Smith being added to the team. Their run game wasn't the best last year, and so Ashton Jenny being there too maybe opens up the field a little bit more because they're gonna have to just try to play around Genty a little more, and maybe he'll get more opportunities on the deep ball. Um, Caleb Johnson, he is kind of like a weird pick to me. Him and Jalen Warren were like the guys I'm like I just don't really know. It's hard when you think the Steelers' offense is gonna regress a little bit, and uh, I don't. I mean, Braxton may end up being a starter. If he is a starter, then this will be a great pick. Um, Jordan Addison, I think, could potentially be a good pick later in the year after he comes back from his suspension. Tucker Kraft, I know people have been hyping him up a lot. I do think the Green Bay receiving room is a little bit crowded, but they were one of the best offenses last year, so it may not matter if they're a little bit crowded. Marquise Brown, I think people have been talking about him for years. Getting back into form as he was whenever he was in Baltimore, and I just don't buy it. I don't really think anything's ever gonna happen. Caleb, I think could potentially be a good pick. That offense got pretty loaded this year. They reinforced the line, and I think that's a really good 12th round pick. If someone desperately needs a QB, maybe you can get something out of it. Brandon Ayuk. I don't really know if he's gonna play this year, and so if he ends up coming back, he could be a very strong late season player that boosts Braxton's team. The Packers defense I will not talk about. I refuse to. Um, and yeah, so another solid team. Uh, Move on to Tiz's team, Leo. I think Leo's team is clearly has a very strong. Actually, Leo's team is very similar to mine in the fact that he does have a very strong receiving core and took a QB early. Um, but differed a little bit from me by going running back. But Jamar Chase, clearly is the best receiver for fantasy right now. He has the QB play and the talent. I think that's what separates him from Justin Jefferson. Uh, and honestly, probably CD. I think Joe Burrow's, definitely probably better than Dak. Um, and then Lad as well. I think we didn't realize how good he was going to be at the beginning of last season, and so I actually think he ends up outscoring his 200 points, 199.9 points from last year. Lamar, I don't think he'll score 430 again. He kind of had a pretty crazy season last year. That is likely unrepeatable, but if he does, then Leo's going to be in very good shape. Leo's running back room is extremely risky to me because Brees Hall, if he's at tip, if he's in at the highest level of that Brees Hall can be, he might actually be great for Leo. But Braylon Allen's back there. I don't really think he's gonna affect anything, but maybe he does. Um, so I actually kind of like the Brees Hall pick in the 4th round. In the 5th round, Leo got Tony Pollard. He's another player. I guess him and Brees are kind of pretty similar to me, but I do think Brees is a better talent, obviously. But they're both kind of in weaker offenses, and they have a backup, who could get some touches, because Braden Allen and Tyjae Spears are both pretty good. Uh, Leo took George Pickens in the 6th. I think that's a pretty strong pick. I think Dak will be better this year. I know weeks 1 through 9 he still sucked. Even after that big contract extension, but is what it is. It's odd number year, and that's where Dak thrives. Mark Andrews always a solid tight end pick. The Ravens offense is gonna be good, and as long as Lamar Jackson's there, it's gonna be a great team, I think. Um, the stack, could work out very well for Leo. But I will say, if Lamar goes down this year, I know he's had it injured a few times over his career, and he's a running quarterback, so he's always putting himself at risk. Leo's team could crumble really quick. A little bit of a riskier team, but I still like it, like the stack. Go for the ceiling. Now we start getting into Leo's bench. He got Cooper Cup. I think could be good. He probably won't finish the season. Joe Mixon. I'm not so sure about. He may not play. He may play. May not play. If he comes back, he might be really good. Um, but I know they added Nick Chubb and there's Damian Pierce there, which Damian Pierce probably won't do anything. But you know, there are running backs that they can run. And so he may never get a lion's share work like this 222 from last year. Tank Bigsby, I think that's a pretty good pick to take on your bench just because he might end up being the starter and you might get a starter in 10th round. Jaden Higgins is a good pick for an offense that might be strong or should be stronger than they were last year. Definitely a down year for CJ Stroud, but I'd hope he bounces back. I like the Brian Robinson pick, kind of. I was on the fence about taking him myself around this area. Obviously Christian McCaffrey is coming back from the Achilles tendonitis. But Washington traded him for a reason, so maybe he's not the best player, and he'll likely split carries with Isaac Guerrero. He's never really been that good about getting in the end zone, but having the opportunity on a San Francisco offense might, be enough. Darren Waller, Coming out of retirement, don't really know. Kareem Hunt, also maybe a pretty good handcuff to have. You know, Isaiah Pacheco got hurt last year. Maybe he gets hurt again. They kind of both ruined each other's seasons at the end of last year, and neither one was really viable when they were both in. So hopefully that is not the case because I took Isaiah Pacheco. But yeah, I think Leo's team overall is a solid team. I think it's a little riskier than some of the other teams. Um, but you know, that is what it is. All right. Beasts of the Middle East. We got a boss right here. Yeah, Nico Collins and Garrett Wilson making his wide receiver duo. Which I love Nico Collins. I was a little upset that a boss got him because I really wanted him. um, but you know, is what it is. I think he's a really good talent. If he stays healthy this year, could be go crazy. Garrett Wilson, it's hard to imagine he plays much better than this. But you know, as a player, he is very talented. But I just don't really have much faith in Justin Fields to give him much more than that. His running back duo, Chase Brown and Chuba Hubbard, I think is very strong. Um, Chase Brown, you know, I don't really think there's anybody on that team who's going to compete with him for carries, and I think near the end of the season, like he pretty much got everything. So he should be a really, really good option this year. I think he's one of the guys that could, you know, end up scoring around the 300 mark, um, given how strong the Bengals' offense is and how terrible their defense is. Chuba Hubbard is, well, I think, the area whenever you start getting the running backs that you're kind of nervous about whether they're gonna continue to have the starter role. But I think Chuba Hubbard was good enough last year where he should. I can't imagine Rico Dottle or Jonathan Brooks getting carries whenever Chuba Hubbard was, you know, such a good player. Sam Laporte had a little bit of a down year relative to expectation, but I think a boss is getting good value for him in the fifth round. Um, if he's back into, you know, 2023 season form, I think a boss could end up being very happy with this pick and, you know, uh, could be a very strong player to have. Jameson Williams as well. A boss is betting pretty heavily on the Lions offense, but, you know, they're probably one of the best offenses to bet on. Um, and I think a lot of people are excited about Jameson Williams this year. Kyler Murray, I am personally not a very big fan of. But I mean, he put up 300 points last year, which is a pretty solid amount for a quarterback. You know, he's. I feel like Kyler, he just as like if you have like one of his receivers or something, you know, sometimes he'll just run the ball and you're like, damn, I feel like the deep ball's open. But as a fantasy, you know, player, maybe it's better for him to run the ball. So it might be fun having him as your quarterback. We start getting into boss's bench around here. And he took Travis Etienne and Javante Williams and Keenan, and I kind of like them all because they're players that a boss could plug and play potentially into his season or into his team right off the bat in case something happens to one of his starters. So like that kind of gives him a little bit of a good immediate depth. Um, Dalton Kincaid. I'm not the I'm a fan of Dalton Kincaid, but I'm not the biggest fan of taking an extra tight end when you already have one and taking in the fifth round. But, you know, if you're going for purely value picks and you think he's going to have a better season and create trade value, then I don't really mind it. But then we hit Abbas's third tight end, which I feel like we're starting into some weird territory on his bench that makes me not like it as much. Um, and then his kicker and Michael Penix and Tua, which so like I think Michael Penix could end up being really good for him, because he looked pretty good at the end of last year, but I'm really much bigger fan of the early part of a boss's bench than the later parts. All right, on to Trophy Son. Allen's team starts off with his receiving core of Malik Neighbors and JSN. I think this could be one of the strongest receiving cores in the league. I think there's a lot of question marks around it for me still, but if Allen ends up having the strongest receiving core, I would not be surprised. Um, you know, Geno Smith played pretty well in Seattle, and maybe Sam Darnold can keep a little bit what he had in Minnesota, what he learned there, and that would make JSN a pretty solid fantasy player this year. And Malik Neighbors, you know, is a ball magnet. The Giants definitely want to force feed him the ball sometimes, and as a fantasy owner, that's really good. We move on to Allen's running back core between Bucky Irving and Travion Henderson. I'm slightly skeptical on it, mostly because of Travion Henderson, but that could just be pure ignorance. I don't really know how good Travion Henderson was in college. Um, but I mean, he was, like top 3 in dynasty leagues, so he's definitely one of the better rookies. And I think he was taken around a time whenever there wasn't too much running back value left on the board. Um, I'm not the biggest. I mean, the Patriots offense definitely started taking a step forward at the end of last season, but they're not the best offense in the league. They're actually, I think they're probably one of the worst. Um, and so I'm curious on how many opportunities he's going to get in the end zone. Um, but he's just a player I'm not really sure about. I thought Bucky Irving was super good last year. And probably should have gotten a starting role over Rashad White much earlier. So I think Bucky Irving's a very good pick. Um, and I also like DeAndre Swift a lot. I feel like that kind of DeAndre Swift definitely buffed up Allen's running back room uh, pretty well. And I actually was kind of mad when he made this pick because I didn't have any running backs and I really needed one. So I definitely would have liked to have Swift on my team. Emeka Egbuka, he's another rookie that we just gotta really see what he's giving. And if Chris Godwin's ends up being out for longer than people think, he could be really good. The Bucks offense was one of the best last year, and we'll just have to see. Ricky Purcell or Purcell, um, I honestly don't really know how good he is either. I know he played a little bit at the end of last year, and he looked pretty good from what I saw at the end of last year. And so I guess he could be another player that adds a little depth to Allen's receiving core. Uh, you know, maybe a decent bench pick here, but I'm just not really sure. Allen seems kind of hard for me to evaluate because his team is really really young. Like he has Malik Neighbors year 2, which obviously is gonna be good. Bucky Irving, I believe year 2. Travion Henderson year 1. JSN year 3. I don't know what year D Swift's in. He's been in the league for a while. Emeka Egbuka year 1. Ricky Purcell year 2. So definitely a tough one. Really young team, could be really good. Justin Herbert, I'm not the biggest fan of in fantasy. He, obviously hasn't been the best for a few years now. But if he ends up being better than people think, then that'd be great for Ryan and Leo. But he just really hasn't get done anything in fantasy for probably like the last 3 years. Colston Loveland is a little bit hard for me to tell what he's gonna do. That offense is to me is pretty crowded. But I think the Bears will be a much better offense. Obviously Ben Johnson's there. He should help a lot. And that line's better, so hopefully they'll be throwing the ball more. Um, Braylon Allen, I think, is a good handcuff. Kyle Pitts, obviously a 10 out of 10 pick right here. Ray Davis, I think, is also another solid handcuff. Um, but yeah, the main thing on Allen's bench, I don't know if there's any players he can plug and play, but there's a lot of benches like that. But he does have some solid handcuffs on here. All right, time for my team. I know people were kind of clowning me for my running backs, and I think I went for zero RB strategy, and zero RB strategy is always tough whenever your league takes 24 running backs by the 5th round. but is what it is. But my receiving core starts off with Justin Jefferson, Brian Thomas. I think is extremely strong. I think they both have potential to be top five at their position in the NFL this year. Josh Allen, I think, has potential to be the number one quarterback as he does every single year. I think he's been like one or two for the last like 6 years. Uh, so can't imagine he regresses that much. He's really consistent. George Kittle, I am slightly worried about. I know he's going into he's age 32 now, and I actually didn't know about this till after we drafted, but apparently there's a big step off for tight ends from age 31 to 32. I think having to Travis Kelsey and Darren Waller and Tony Gonzalez and a bunch of other guys that they started kind of regressing around the age of 32. So I'm hoping I can get one more out of George Kittle. I don't feel as good about the pick as I did when I made it, but it is what it is. Maybe he'll still pop off. RJ Harvey was, in my mind, the best running back option left. I mean, there really wasn't anybody there. Everybody kind of grabbed everyone after, I believe DeAndre Swift was the one to go right before. Like, not the pick right before, but like the last running back before. So there really wasn't anything to go with. I mean, it could have been Tony Pollard, too. But I don't actually recall. Uh, I think he's in a mid-pack offense, and I think there's a lot of I feel like there's a decent amount of hype around him, and so I'm hoping he ends up living up to that. Isaiah Pacheco, obviously he got hurt last year, and then when he came back, he was not very good. But I'm hoping with a full off season, he can get back into form and can be the lead back for an offense that should be at least middle of the road to the high end, I would think. Chris Olave also got hurt. Clearly he doesn't have a very good quarterback, but he's gonna be my flex, and I think he can at least service the job. Uh, J.K. Dobbins, in my mind, gave me a little bit of security for R.J. Harvey, but honestly, I kind of regret this pick right here as well. Um, I kind of wish I would have gone with someone that just gave me more of a ceiling, but maybe it ends up working out for me. Jordan Mason, I thought was a great pick. Um, he was really good in San Francisco when he played, and if Aaron Jones gets hurt, I think he's the clear-cut RB1 on that team, and could be like RB2, RB1 value. So definitely would help my team out a lot. Khalil Shakir or Shakur. I kind of wanted to just give a stack with Josh Allen. We don't really. I mean, it's kind of hard to tell who like the definitive wide receiver one is on Buffalo because Josh Allen spreads the ball around so much. But I'll be happy with Khalil Shakir, and hopefully he's the guy. Rashad White, I think is a good handcuff to Bucky Irving. I think he'll get the starter role, and potentially he still gets carries. Yeah. Christian Kirk, maybe not the best pick in the world. I mean, there really wasn't much in the 12th round, but I kind of do regret taking him here. Maybe I should have taken Brandon Ayuk instead or someone who has more value later in the year. I don't think I'll ever play Christian Kirk. Um, and then I took Kendre Miller and Justice Hill just as handcuffs for Derrick Henry and Alvin Kamara, just because they're a little bit older. But I mean, these may not even be the guys. We'll see. So, a pretty decent team. Just a pretty big hole at running back. All right, on to Justin's team. I think Justin, started off with a pretty strong RB duo here between Genty and Jacobs. Obviously, Genty's a rookie this year, and so we'll just have to see how he does in the league. But he definitely has that RB1 potential. He was crazy in college, and if I know about players, they're definitely crazy. So definitely a good pick. Maybe not the best offense in the world, but I think they'll be better than they were last year. So I think that could be exciting. Josh Jacobs, Justin had him last year, and he was a great pick. As long as Josh Jacobs is healthy, he is probably one of the best running backs in the league. He's not like with the the top three, but he's definitely up there. Jaden Daniels, great pick. I'm hoping we see big rookie regression or second year regression here, sophomore slump, if you will. Um, as being a Cowboys fan. But Jaden Daniels looked really good last year and really stepped into his own. And they added Debo Samuel to try to help him get some more offense. He has the greatest offseason quarterback or running back of all time, Corey Krosky Merritt, apparently. I'll have to actually see how good that guy is because there's a lot of offseason hype around him. Um, and then we start getting into Justin's receiving core, which is a little bit of a weaker receiving core, in my personal opinion. But I think they have high upside. Xavier Worthy will be the wide receiver one for the time being until Rasheed Rice gets back, and then we'll see how that plays out. Um, and he's Patrick Mahomes starting him. Maybe they'll get that connection. I know I saw him spend like 30% of the money he's made for the next 3 years on a garage and some cars. So he better make sure he stays in the NFL. Otherwise, he might be in a little bit of trouble. Um, Marvin Harrison. I again, he's like a top tier talent, or could be a top. I mean, he's evaluated as top tier talent coming into the NFL. And, if he ends up living up to what the expectation of him was, then this could be a great pick for Justin. But if he kind of sits like last year, then he's kind of where Justin took him, a fifth round pick. Um, Rome is a player, on a crowded offense, I think. But, the offense should be much better, so you may see, better upside. I think Matthew Golden, another player that I think is pretty good, but is also on a crowded offense, but they're another good offense. So, sometimes it's just better being on a good offense, even if it's crowded. If that guy ends up being the guy. Tyler Warren, I've heard a lot of glaze on this fellow. Again, don't watch college ball, don't know. But should be a good tight end pick. Not a top tight end pick, but if he ends up being one, you know, that'd be dope for Justin. Um, Technically Matthew Golden's part of Justin's bench, so I actually think that's a very strong bench pick. And then he also took Josh Downs, who I know he likes a lot. I'm not sure how I feel about any Colts receiver, given Danny Dimes will be thrown, but I'm sure one will emerge. Jerome Ford, I think a solid bench pick. Najee Harris, a solid handcuff slash maybe starter early season. Justin Fields, I thought could potentially be a season winner this year because of all the rushing value he has at QB. But Justin has Jaden Daniels, so I don't know if it means as much. But maybe you can ship him off to somebody later. Will Shipley, uh, maybe a good running or a backup to Saquon. I don't really know what he's gonna do. And then Justin also got Amari Cooper, who was just picked up like a week or two ago. So I think overall Justin's got a pretty well-rounded team with a good ceiling on it. All right, go into Rockstar Domination. My dad. Start out with Puka Nakua, and I thought Puka Nakua is probably one of the riskiest first-round picks. In the fact that Matt Stafford's dealing with the back issue, and Puka Nakua's, always kind of had some lingering issues. But I do think, if him and Stafford both are healthy all year, he has potential in my mind to be the wide receiver one. But then my dad followed it up in the third round by taking Devontae Adams. So I don't know how I feel about a double Rams duo as your core. But if the Rams offense is really good, then I might have to eat my own words. Um, he took Jonathan Taylor and Alvin Kamara. I think both offenses are pretty weak, but I think both running backs are still really good, and both offenses should run through them. If they don't, then I don't even know what's going on. But they're kind of like I just they're really good. Just the offenses, I'm just not very confident in at all. Jalen Waddle had pretty big down year last year, but Tua was hurt for a lot of it. Um, so we'll see if he bounces back. It could be a really good fifth round pick if he bounces back with Tua being healthy. Baker, I think for a lot of people, Baker was the trap pick in the sixth round. I know he was the player who had the most touchdowns over expected last year. But we'll have to see if he can keep it up. I mean, 41 touchdowns is hard to replicate. Um, but maybe not the worst pick in the world, but it could end up living to bite my dad in the butt. What else have to say? He followed up with the David Njoku, who I didn't really like as a pick either. Um, I just don't really have much respect for the Browns' offense this year. They're kind of like, I don't know, their QB situation's so weird, and I mean, not even the Colts wanted Joe Flacco anymore, so yeah, it's gonna be tough. Uh, but David Njoku as a talent is very good, and I think that's kind of what my dad's team is. He has lots of good talents, but I'm a little worried about the teams right now. Jalen Warren, we'll have to see how that running back room shapes out, but he isn't his clear cut. He's not one of his starters, so he's not the worst bench pick in the world. Austin Eckler, could be the starter this year. But he's kind of slow and old. But I mean, if he's getting the opportunities, then he is a good ninth round pick in my opinion. Brock Purdy should maybe have a bounce back year with CMC being back. Hopefully CMC's back. Um, Jake Ferguson. I mean, he's just a backup tight end. Maybe a little early on the backup tight end. Uh, and Bashal Tootin, which I'm not really sure about the Jacksonville Jaguars running back room. It's hard to imagine he emerges as a clear-cut one, but if he does, it'd be really exciting. Cedric Tillman, again, a receiver on the Browns. That just, I mean, it's the Browns. Like, I don't think the offense is going to be doing a whole lot this year. So I'm not the biggest fan of my dad's bench, and I think his team's a little risky. But I think a lot of these guys have high upside, and it could end up working out better than I think. Time for All I Do Is Win. Christian, clearly a little bit salty about the ESPN rankings. Hopefully my rankings don't make him as salty. We'll just have to find out. Um, but yeah, let's get into the team. He started, his core with CD Lamb and Mike Evans, which I think is a very good core. I think they're both extremely reliable receivers, and I think CD has a very high ceiling if Dak's playing the full season. And Mike Evans, pretty much guaranteed for 1,000 yards. Achan and Kenneth Walker, I think are both riskier running backs, but Achan, in my opinion, has the one of the highest ceilings at running back. I believe when Tua is playing, he gets the most targets of any running back in the league, and receptions are usually even more important than carries. So that should be really good. Um, Kenneth Walker, I think, is really good when he's playing. But it's a matter if he stays healthy. But Christian kind of secured that up by taking Zach Charbonnet down here. So either way, he's getting whoever the starter is in Seattle. So I don't think it's as worrisome. He took Cortland Sutton, who had his breakout season last year. I think for a while Cortland Sutton had kind of been underwhelming expectation because of poor QB play. And so definitely I think is a pretty good fifth round pick, and him and Bo Nix have a good connection and should help Christian's team. Took Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt in the sixth. This is the offseason hype player. If he ends up being whatever all people are hyping him up to be, this is a great pick. If he is a seventh round running back that does nothing, then this could be one of the worst picks in the draft. Maybe not the worst pick in the draft. You can always draft a running back in the first round that scores 0 points. It's happened several times. Le'Veon Bell, Adrian Peterson, I believe twice. But yeah, and so on and so on. Evan Ingram, I know people are clowning Christian for this pick. But in 2023, I believe Evan Ingram was, I'm gonna pull this up over here. Evan Ingram was the tight end 2 that year with 173 points. So if he can, replicate any of that, it could be a good year for Christian. But he was hurt last year, so we'll also have to wait and see if he can do that. Um, Dak Prescott, I think will have a great year, but I'm biased. I'm a Cowboys fan, so I really like the eighth round value of Dak. I actually kind of wanted him myself, but then Josh Allen fell so far in the third, so I was like, you know what? Give me Josh Allen. He's not risky, and hopefully does not get hurt this year. uh, Start moving into Christian's bench here, which I guess Jacory's kind of going to be part of Christian's bench since he was a sixth pick, and you already took two running backs, three receivers. Um, mentioned Zach or Keon Coleman. I don't really know how to feel about Keon Coleman. He was a rookie taken last year, and I know Allen is really excited about him, and then Allen started to hate him because he didn't do anything. Uh, yeah, I already mentioned Zach Charbonnet. Drake May, I think, could be a good backup to Dak, for Christian's team. Drake May had a pretty good end of season last year. Ollie Gordon could be a good backup for Achan. I think Jalen Wright freaking sucks, so Ollie Gordon should be a good option to go to. Trey Harris, I don't know if he'll start at all this year. Um, it's kind of hard for me to evaluate anyone in the Chargers offense outside of Ladd, and I think Keenan will probably get some work, but uh, anyone like within the receiving room, I mean, not like Amari and Hampton. Demario Douglas, it could potentially, if he ends up being any good, could be a good stack with Drake May. But we'll just have to see there. And then we're on to Tighten Up. Uh, Erman's team, I think, has a pretty good RB duo between Bijan, Amari, and Hampton. I think Bijan is primed to be the RB1 this year. I know a lot of people wanted him in the draft, and a lot of people were upset not to get him. And Amari and Hampton, I think, he was obviously really good in college, and if Genty didn't have that crazy year last year, he probably would have been the first running back overall taken. Um, J.K. Dobbins was really solid in the running back or Chargers running back room last year before he got hurt. Um, and if Hampton ends up being the breakout over Najee Harris, then this point total right here, projected point total, could be much higher. But I think it's pretty fair to put him around the 230. Uh, I'm not the biggest fan of Ehrman's wide receiver room. He took three early, but AJ Brown um is a very good. I think he's actually probably one of the most underrated players in fantasy. Uh, but I always think he gets hurt, is a little bit injury prone, but maybe that's just a misconception of mine. Um, yeah, and then DK, I think DK kind of always underwhelms expectation. And then Zay Flowers, um, on a team that's just so run heavy, it's hard to imagine the consistency of Lamar Jackson having as good of a throwing season as he did. So I'm not the biggest fan of wide receiver room, but he does have them, and I could eat my words. We'll just have to see. And also DK Metcalf. Oh, sorry. DK Metcalf is playing in a different system than he has in the past, so maybe that'll fix everything. Playing on the Steelers has Aaron Rodgers thrown, but I just don't really know. Tyrone Tracy, not the strongest running back on the offense, and Cam Scatterby could potentially cause some issues for him, but I don't really know. He was I don't even know what point he became the lead back last year, but he is a lead back taken in the sixth round, so I think the upside of where he took him is actually pretty good. Travis Kelsey, I think is part of the core of tight ends that I thought had pretty good upside value. I think Travis Kelsey had a down year last year and still played pretty freaking good. He just didn't play up to expectation, and so he may have gotten pushed too far down drafts. T-Law, I'm not a very big fan of, but they added Travis Hunter, and I know they hired the new coach. I don't even remember his name right now because I'm not a Jags fan. But I know he is pretty good. I believe he's offense coordinator or did something with the offenses, and so maybe I believe he was with the Bucks last year and helped Baker Mayfield play as well as he did. So maybe he can do the same thing for Trevor Lawrence. Michael Pittman, not a big fan of Colts receivers, and I don't really know who the wide receiver one in Indy is going to be. Jaden Blue, I could see Jaden Blue end up being the starter in Dallas by the end of the year. I think our running back room is a little mixy. I think Miles Sanders freaking sucks. Javonte Williams could be much better, but Jaden Blue ends up being the starter by the end of the year. I would not be surprised. Rashid Shaheed, I don't think has just ever really lived up to the hype of some of the weeks he's had. He always just has these random breakout weeks, and just never lives up to them. Um, Jordan Love, just kind of going with his late round pick of T-Law. I actually think is a better pick than T-Law. Um, but we'll have to see. And then yeah, JJ McCarthy. I mean, third quarterback. I don't really care. Uh, and then extra tight end. I'm honestly not a very big fan of Ehrman's bench at all. Um, to me, the only real potential on it is Jaden Blue and him adding a little bit of depth to his quarterback. But I feel like just always leads to situations where you're going back and forth and can't ever get it right. Not Ehrman specifically, but fantasy players as a whole. And on to the last team, Dey and the Blowfish. Tate decided to run it back with Christian McCaffrey. Um, you know, he could end up being Tate's, favorite running back of all time after this year, or he could be the biggest Christian McCaffrey hater in the world after this. All depends if he plays the full season. It'd be rough to get screwed by the same running back 2 years in a row. Saquon Barkley to the flow nose. But let's move on. Uh, he followed up with Drake London and T. Higgins. And I think T. Higgins has potential to have a much stronger year than he did last year. I know Jamar Chase was getting so much and played so well. Um, but I think T. Higgins is a really good receiver and potentially could play very well. Drake London, I think could score even higher than he did this last year. I think Drake London is an extremely good NFL talent, and I think Michael Penix has potential to elevate him to an even higher level. So I'm really excited to watch Drake London play this year. I think Joe Burrow is I think Joe Burrow is a great stack to run with T. Higgins, and so you may get lit up by the Bengals some weeks if you're playing against Tate. Um, David Montgomery, I think, I'm just kind of waiting for the season that it just ends up. I guess that was last year, but I think David Montgomery got hurt right at some point. But I think he'll always be a viable option. Um, but I was gonna say the year that oh my god, I've been talking so long, I'm drawing blank. Jahmyr Gibbs. The year Jahmyr Gibbs is like clear cut their RB1 there, but like when they're both playing together, they both have opportunities. The offense is good, and it could be a really good situation for Tate. I think fifth round, 200-point RB is definitely really good. Um, Jerry Jeudy, I'm not the biggest fan of Browns receivers as I've mentioned in the past, but I think Jerry Jeudy is very good, and he had to play with poor QB play in Denver for a while. So we'll just have to see. T.J. Hawkinson is another one of those tight end second in the seventh round that I thought could end up being extremely good value for teams, and T.J. Hawkinson's really good. We start moving in Tate's bench here. He took Stephon Diggs, which I know everyone thinks Stephon Diggs is washed. I'm not really sure. I'm not the biggest fan, but Tate could have a receiver that ends up, doing pretty well. I know he did good at the beginning of the season for the Texans, and then he got hurt. So I'm honestly just not really sure. I know the offense is kind of weak there, so we'll just have to see. Cam Scattaboo, maybe not the best handcuff to have, but teams are going to start and roll. It's always good to have a handcuff. Nick Chubb, I think could be really good. We'll just have to see how the Texans RB room works out. Uh, Jaden Reed, I thought was a really good bench pick. He's gone 11th round, scored 170 as a receiver last year. I know Matthew Golden's there now, but this just seems like pretty good value to me for a player that you could play off your bench immediately, potentially. And he also had Rashad Bateman, which I didn't realize Rashad Bateman scored 152 last year until I started doing this. And I feel like receiver scoring that much uh, is actually pretty good value in this late of a round. Um, but again, as I mentioned with the other Ravens receivers, I don't know if they'll be able to live up to what they did last year. Lamar had one of probably the craziest QB seasons of all time, and somehow didn't win MVP. It should be hard to replicate it. One Night Robinson, don't really care. Yeah, I don't really think there was a bad team in the league. I think every team's viable. Every team has potential to be the best. But we'll get right into the rankings here. And I'm going to start just by revealing the RB ones. And people may be mad. I think one thing I'll say before I reveal it is for a lot of these rankings, there's big clusters that are hard to tell who is the best and who's the, like, not who's the best and who's the worst. I think usually it's pretty obvious that, like, one running room is way worse than other. But there's particular rooms that are really close and there's small variance between them. And if you're 8, some teams I wouldn't be surprised if you're 6. I think there's one team in particular that got screwed by the system I'm doing the most, and there's one team in particular that got boosted by the team or by the system the most. And I'll explain that after we go over this. So here are the best RB rooms in the league. We'll start from the bottom actually. So I think mine and Leo's RB rooms are clear cut the 2 worst in the league. There's a pretty big gap between 11th and 10th. And I will say in this kind of analysis, it's a little bit unfair because there's that big of a gap. But Leo and myself, neither one of us really have a clear cut RB1 that's gonna go crazy this year. We have like RB2 at best, and debatably I might just have RB3s. That's why I'm below Leo. But yeah. When we get into like teams like Tate, I think Tate, a boss, my dad. Let me look at Alan's team. Alan's team, and yeah, and Alan's team. I think the big issues, with these 4 that you kind of run into is that they all have a running back that is good. Like Tate's got Christian McCaffrey, but then David Montgomery, isn't the best 2 to have, and then he doesn't really have anybody else. So that's why Tate's, next in line. A boss, has Chase Brown and Chuba Hubbard, and then his next is Travis Etienne. There's not really anyone there. All right. Derek, or sorry, not Derek. My dad, his team has, JT and Alvin, and then not really anybody there. And then Alan's team, and why I actually put Alan, why I put Alan a little bit above you guys is because, Bucky Irving and Trayvon Henderson, even though I like Trayvon Henderson the best, I actually really like DeAndre Swift on Alan's team. And so I actually had him, in my mind, put you over that. And I actually think I'll conclude Braxton um, into that list as Let me see Christians real quick again. I'm trying to remember here. And I'll include Christian in there as well. Yeah, so like honestly, these I'll say I definitely think Tate's team's worse, or his running back room is worse than your guys's. But like these teams right here, like a boss could easily shift up to 5 in my mind, and you know that actually hurts his point total a lot. So a boss might be getting screwed a little bit here. Um, but yeah, and the main reason Christian is above in my mind is I love the ceiling of Achan and Kenneth Walker, but he also has both of them insured, which that's kind of like a bench thing. But I couldn't help myself but include it, and so I just love the ceiling there, and I don't think he's gonna miss out on it. Um, you know, I think next up, Justin's Genty and Jacobs is just a great double, just is. And then he doesn't really have anybody, and so even though like Allen has someone, I just like the ceiling of both of his guys more. And so there's a little bit of variation there. I just think they're gonna be better. Ehrman, I love Bijan and Amari and Hampton. I think they're both gonna be great. And then Tyrone Tracy, I think to me just puts him a hair above Ryan because it just adds a little bit of more RB depth that Ryan doesn't really have as much. But if you want to have Ryan above him because you think Jameer Gibbs and Kyron Williams are just better, that's fine too. Um, and then Collins, I thought was the best. I think they, Saquon, strong offense. James Cook, strong offense. Aaron Jones, strong offense. And all these guys are good. And so Colin really has what, in my mind, no other team does in his RB room is that he has 3 guys that can all, do, that are high value in my mind. Um, but I think Ehrman and Ryan could swap, and I wouldn't really care. I think Justin's pretty good where I have him at. All right, on to the receivers. Why'd I do that? Here it is. All right. To me, I thought that Ryan and Collins receivers were the worst. And the receiving is actually a little bit closer than the running back, so maybe I should have changed the multiplier a little bit. But I just I just didn't really like the receiving rooms. I mean, neither one of them took a receiver that early, and I feel like both receiving rooms could get pretty dicey. Ryan's bench, of receivers is kind of weighted more on his bench side than it is here on his receiving side. And so I didn't really want to conflate the two. And so that is why Ryan's is worse. And I think I just like Collins' guys ceiling more overall. Uh, yeah. And then we get into Ehrman's team. Again, I had mentioned earlier that I didn't really like AJ Brown, DK Metcalf, and Zay Flowers like that much relative to ADP. And so to me, his team is just a little bit lower. Justin's, I think he has good upside, but really low floors as well. He has good potential bench players, but that's also weighted into Justin's bench. My dad's receivers, I think they're really good, and if Stafford plays the whole year, could be really good, and if Tua plays the whole year, could be much higher than what it is at 8. Um, but overall, I don't like the floor of it. I think it could get real dicey real fast. And then a boss's Nico Collins, Garrett Wilson, Jameson Williams. I think is very strong, and we start getting into receiving. I guess on my dad's team, realistically speaking, we start getting into receiving rooms. I consider it really really strong. And then a boss's is very good as well. Tate's, I have him slightly above, and I'm trying to remember why. Yeah, I think I just like Drake London and I'm more of a Drake London T Higgins guy than a than Garrett Wilson. I like Nico Collins is obviously very good, and but I think I just weight Drake London Teagan so much over Garrett Wilson to me personally. But actually, maybe not. Oh, I'm kind of. Oh, but then he has Jerry Judy. I mean, a Boston Tate to me are like. I mean, there's not really much difference here. Oh my gosh, maybe I don't even know. We're just gonna keep it as is. I'm sorry, boss. I told you one team kind of gets screwed, and you may be figuring out who it is. um, and at the end, honestly, you'll just have to see. Um, all I do is win. Christian Ed, CeeDee Lamb, Mike Evans, Cortland Sutton, all really good. All have quarterbacks I trust. So Christian's at fifth, pretty strong. Team Brax, he has Amon Ra, Terry, Calvin Ridley, really strong. Allen, Malik Neighbors, JSN, Mika Egbuka. I think, between Malik and JSN, he has what I consider to be maybe a slightly tier up, but actually him and Braxton could swap too in my mind. Yeah, I mean they're just really close. And then I think me and Leo both have the best wide receivers duo in the league. Um, and I don't really think it's that close. And then I still like Chris Olave on my team, but the reason Leo goes over me is because I think George Pickens is a good value. And I prefer him over Olave. And so, yep, that's the receiver rankings. Quarterback rankings, these may be a little more biased. I did look at, past seasons and how players performed, and so I try to keep everything as good as possible. But, yep. So, I put Lamar a little over Josh Allen, but yeah, we'll get into that later. We'll start at the bottom. For Ehrman, I'm not a Trevor Lawrence fan at all, and I may eat my words, and he may have the best season of his career after me saying this. Um, and then he took Jordan Love and JJ McCarthy, so I just feel like it's a sagging blow. Don't really care. Allen took what's his name? Justin Herbert, who really hasn't done anything. A boss, or Justin Herbert hasn't done anything in a while. Like obviously early on, he was really good. Boss has Kyler Murray. As I mentioned, I hate Kyler Murray, so I'm sorry, boss. You're kind of getting screwed here. And honestly, you're kind of on the later end of players that you could be above. Colin had Bo Nix, which, I think him and Kyler honestly could probably be swapped, but is what it is. Team Brax, he has Patrick Mahomes. Uh, I think this speaks for itself. My dad has Baker. I feel like the offense is just better, and I think he's gonna be really good. All I Do Is Win has Dak. This is probably the most biased pick in this whole rankings, but I think Dak has a strong bounce back year. Uh, Tate, who did he take again? He took Joe Burrow. He doesn't, get those rushing touchdowns, but I feel like he might be the best passer in the league right now. Just as Jaden Daniels speaks for itself. This doesn't have as much proven as the three above him. Ryan took Jalen Hurts, who I just don't think he is quite as good as Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson for fantasy. And then Josh Allen's here, and I think Lamar's ceiling is just a little bit higher than Josh, so I threw him up just a little bit. On to the tight ends. So I thought my dad had the weakest tight end, and I'm just not a fan of the Browns. So like David Njoku's just not doing it for me. Colston Loveland for Allen, I don't know how much he's gonna do in a crowded offense, and I still need to see the offense be really good. If Colston Loveland ends up being much higher, then is what it is. I honestly don't really know much about him. I don't watch college. Tyler Warren for Justin, could be much higher, but he doesn't have great QB play in my mind, so we'll just have to see. Evan Ingram, I think, has, better QB play, and I think he, I think he he's shown more than Tyler Warren hasn't had the chance to show anything. So if it's just hard for me to say. Team Brax. Who did Braxton have again? He had Tucker Craft. I think is a really good offense. Again, a little bit crowded, but they're one of the best offenses in the league. Rockstar Dominate. Wait. Oh no, wrong. Oh my gosh. Times Khalil. Sorry about that. Read the wrong list for a second. Um, he took Mark Andrews, who I think is very strong. I just find it hard to imagine the Ravens replicate what they did last year. Dey the Blowfish. TJ Hawkinson. I always liked TJ Hawkinson a lot. I think his ceiling is going to be really high. But if you want to have Leo over him or something, that I think that's okay. TitanUp, I think is that Travis? TitanUp is Travis Kelce. Again, high ceiling. He's proven. We could see more, but if he ends up being much lower and regressing, then definitely could see that. Beast of the Middle East, Sam Laporte. I feel like you start getting here, everything's more clear cut. A little bit more crowded offense, very good offense. George Kittle is probably the most proven among the players here and has still been good. I hate Kirk Cousins has he has Brock Bowers, who is one of the best tight ends last year, and then as I mentioned earlier, that I think Trey McBride's just a little bit better. And so there's that. And so on to the benches. And this one is extremely hard to weigh. And this is where, this is closest. And honestly, I'm sorry to say it, but Abbas got kind of screwed a little bit again. I honestly could see Abbas being higher on here. And so on the overall rankings, based on what you've heard me say, I think Abbas is going to realize that he could shift up a few spots. But let's get into it. I thought Erman's bench was the worst. I don't really think, and I feel like it's kind of clear cut. I feel like everyone else, there's more redeeming qualities. I mean, there's not really much on Erman's bench I like. Yeah, I mean, that's not even how else to say it. I don't really want to go over the whole team again. On Allen's bench, let me take a look again. I felt like he had a couple handcuffs, but there's not really anybody that he can play right now. So if someone in his starting lineup goes down, he's gonna be in a tough spot. On my dad's, I think this is where stuff shifts a little bit. I think he had a few players I thought he could play, and maybe a couple potential handcuffs. And I kind of value having players you might be able to play, now over a player that maybe you're handcuffing and hoping the other guy gets hurt, or may not hoping the other guy gets hurt, but in case the other guy gets hurt, depending who you are. Braxton is kind of in the same boat. Well, actually, he's a little bit different of a boat than my dad, in the fact that I think he has guys that he might be able to play later in the year, but they're not handcuffs. I think they're players that are good. They're just not playing right now, like Jordan Addison, Brandon Ayuk. Leo has, I really don't know how to think about Joe Mixon, so that was hard for me to evaluate. Tank Bigsby, Leo might be able to play. Cooper Kupp, Leo might be able to play. Brian Robinson, I think he's a decent handcuff, and I think Kareem Hunt is too. And honestly, you just realized I think I started reading this list wrong. Yeah, I did. Damn it. I got it. These lists are mixing me up. Let's see. Team Brax there. Yeah. Potential players there. I honestly got so lost in the list for a second. But essentially, Erman's bench is very bad. I didn't really like Allen's that much either. And then these are all kind of exchangeable. And then Ryan and Collins, I felt like answered their holes, like the holes on their team, the best, and had players they could almost play immediately, and had good handcuffs. I feel like they just were most well-rounded. And so let's get in to the final rankings. And first, we have the Scrub Club. Second, Hate Kirk Cousins. Third, Time to Khalil. Fourth, Flow Nose. Fifth, the Asparaguses. Sixth, All I Do Is Win. Seventh, Dey and the Blowfish. Eighth, Team Brax. Ninth, Beast of the Middle East. 10th, TitanUp. 11th, Trophy Sun. And 12th, Rockstar Domination. This list is only 25% of what the year is. I think there's a whole 75%, and you could see that last year, Allen's team started off like 0-6 and then ran the tables. Colin's team started off like 6-0 and lost every single game. So there's a lot of season to play, and we're just gonna have to see what happens. Uh, Again, I think a boss's team is the team that kind of got screwed over by this system the most. If you value a a boss's running back room's slightly higher than a lot of these teams and receiver room. Um, and maybe even his bench or quarterback. Uh, he could, in my mind, shift up to like this 3-4 spot. Um, and I actually think all of this is pretty close. So it's good stuff. If anybody's curious about this Excel spreadsheet at all, I essentially stripped this data from the other sheets using this formula here, and I can give you access to one if you want to do any daily analytics. I'll be posting more stuff later using this type of stuff. Hopefully getting more into data analytics. It's kind of a fun hobby. Um, but yeah, that's all. If anybody's got any gripes, take it to me in the group message.